Hello and welcome to another episode of the Uncommon Energy Podcast. Plenty to talk about this week. Some fun little debates going on Twitter in the community about a sequencing issue from the new set. Of course, we have the results of the Peoria Regional Championships that just took place this past weekend, the largest regionals of all time. We'll have everyone's favorite segment, Guess That Flavor Text. A little bit of a viral TCG moment for maybe the first time. We'll talk about that. And of course, our favorite decks moving forward as the meta continues to evolve. My name is Trainer Chip Ritchie, and I am joined here, as always, by my co-host Azul GG, coming off a top 32 finish in Peoria this past weekend. What's going on, Azul? How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I got top 32 at Peoria. No top 8 this time around as well, but I mean, not too bad, right? My goal this season has been to kind of put myself in a position to where when the tournament ends, I'm either made top 8 or I feel like I put myself in a position to get top 8 through my deck choice and play. And I feel like I did that again here in Peoria. Same with Baltimore. So just going to keep hopefully replicating that, and then the top eights and the wins will kind of come alongside with it, but just got to put in the work beforehand to make sure I'm putting myself in that position. So yeah, played Reggie, got top 32, and yeah, content overall, I guess, with it at the end of the day. Like I said, I feel like I put myself in that position, so I can only hope at that point that the cards kind of play out for me and to be favorable enough to get like a top 8.
Yeah, and I had a great time in Peoria as well. I was one of the casters for the event, so thanks as always for to the Pokemon Company for bringing me out. Had a great time doing it, and we saw some awesome games on the stream as well. Some really fun moments. The finals, while it was not great for Cal Connor, it was very exciting for Tord. The sequence at the end in Game 2 for him to get the win on the first turn was pretty wild. So we'll talk about some of those things as we talk about the results. And it was a really cool weekend as well from a like show perspective, like a casting perspective, because there was so many new decks. There's so much to be excited about. We talked about this on the stream a little bit, but it's not often, and maybe not ever, that you see a set that introduces this many new archetypes, right? To like
Yeah.
the competitive, like usually it'll be like there's the flagship card of the set that's going to have a big impact, and then maybe one other deck is okay, right? Like if you
Yeah.
think back to something like Battle Styles when it came out, like Rapid Strike Urshifu was huge, very, very good. Single Strike was like okay. It saw a little bit of play, and then the meta was kind of, similar outside of that to what it was before. This tournament, we had Giratina V-Star, we had Lost Box, we had Kyurem VMAX, we had Hisuian Gudra V-Star, we had Hisuian Zoroark V-Star, all brand new archetypes, all doing very well at the tournament. Absolutely insane. Not something that I don't know if we've ever seen a set have like that deep of a competitive impact as far as how many of the ultra rares in the set are like that playable right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with we didn't get a broken card like a Palkia or a Mew VMAX, and Palkia was the most dominant deck of the tournament when it got down to the end of it. It wasn't the most played, but like yeah, that's why, right? We didn't see a Mew VMAX come out of this set, or a Palkia or an ADP to go back all the way that far, right? And we haven't had one of those for a little or it's nice to not have one of those finally, where we don't have like a ridiculously dominant card or broken card, whatever you want to call it, in a set, so that it becomes like the main focal point of the format until the next set, which we kind of saw from Palkia, right? Like we saw how the World Championships went. It was like 40% of the meta, right?
Right.
So yeah, definitely refreshing to finally get a set release where there's a lot of good stuff, but nothing broken for sure. A lot of things that are really good in their own ways, but not quite as versatile to potentially be as dominant as something like the Mew VMAXs and the Palkias we've had as of late.
And I think something that's cool about it as well is like all five of the decks I mentioned are strong, but they all five have their unique individual problems, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a good thing instead of something just being
Yes,
overwhelmingly
exactly.
broken, that there are very few downsides to the card, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the meta. But before we get into that too much, we wanted to start by talking about some of the discussion that's been going on in the community on Twitter today around a little bit of a sequencing debate. So for anyone who doesn't understand what we mean by sequencing, basically it's just in your turn while playing the Pokemon trading card game the order in which you do things. So when you look at your hand of 6 or 7 cards, or however many you have, it's deciding which cards to play in which order you do things like use abilities on your field, which order you do things as attach an energy before or after you research, right? And these decisions you make, there is always a statistically correct one depending on what you're trying to accomplish that turn. So I always tell people when you're going into a turn, try to envision what your ideal result is from this turn. What do you
Yeah.
want to make happen? And try to figure out the most statistically likely path with the cards you are given to achieve whatever your goal is for that turn. So if you're looking for a bunch of Pokemon, you might want to use a draw ability before you use Quick Ball for turn, right? Things like that. So that all goes into sequencing. And a big debate that has come up recently on Twitter is around the new cards from Lost Origin, Colress's Experiment, and Comfey. Powerful cards from the new set. For anyone who doesn't know, Azul, what they do, you want to just fill in and talk about what the debate has been a little bit?
Yeah, so basically in the Lost Zone decks, there's two main cards you utilize to build up your Lost Zone, right? You have Colress Experiment and Comfey. Comfey is a Pokemon with the ability, you look at the top two cards of your deck. One of them goes to your hand, one of them goes to the Lost Zone. Colress looks at the top 5 cards of your deck. It is your supporter for the turn, and it takes 3 of them, and the other 2 go to the Lost Zone. So the debate has been, if you are in a spot where you're comfortable to utilize both of those cards in a turn, which one should you play first? Obviously, if you want to use like a Marnie or a Researcher or a Roxanne or a Boss, you'd use Comfey first because Colress is a supporter, right? So you'd use Comfey first and be like, well, if I get my Boss, I'm going to use my Boss and not use my Colress's Experiment. But for turns where you plan to definitely use Colress's Experiment and to definitely use Flower Selecting, the question has kind of been, which one should you use first? And I'm on the side of the Colress's Experiment um side of things, because it just, the first thing when I first played the deck, it just felt right. And the more that I broke down the math and thought about it further, it does kind of just feel correct to use Colress's Experiment first. I don't know if you disagree with that though, Chip.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I think a lot of the discussion online has really kind of backed my thoughts on that initially. So I think the discussion kind of started today. I should back up a little bit because I think the first time I heard it talked about was actually on Mello's podcast last week. He had Henry Brand on and he asked Henry about it. And Henry gave this same answer of between Pokestop, Colress's Experiment, and Comfey, if you know you're going to play Colress's Experiment for turn, what's the sequence of these things? And Henry said Pokestop, then Comfey, or sorry, Pokestop, then Colress, then Comfey, which I think is the correct decision. And his reasoning was definitely very sound and good. But
You
a
just
lot of
shouldn't
the
Pokestop though.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
cut the
Azul is a,
cut
a
the
po-
Pokestop so you don't even have to add
Azul's a
that to the
Pokestop
equation.
hater. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cut your Pokestops first, and then Chorus, and then Comfey.
But I think a lot of the discussion today really centered around Finn Lynch, who posted hypothetical. If it's your first turn going second, the only things you can do are play Colress's Experiment and use Flower Selecting. Which do you do first and why? I have my answer, but I'm curious what you all think. And there's a ton of replies on. Well, I scrolled. There we go. Show more replies. There's a ton of replies on this post. And I think one of my favorite responses was from Isaiah Bradner, who broke it down mathematically. And I think his thoughts are going to mirror yours and mine pretty closely.
Yeah.
So here's how he broke it down. Here we go. Which of multiple good cards you lost zone is by far the more important decision you have to make, and game losing if you get it wrong? Colress lost zones 40% of the cards, 2 out of the 5 you look at. Comfey lost zones 50%, 1 out of the 2.
Yep.
You Colress first because it lost zones a less percent of the cards. Alternatively, off of the Colress, there is a very high chance you see at least one card you know you can lost zone, often two. Off of Comfey, that chance is a lot lower. This means that the Colress decision is logically easier, so you will pick right more off of it. Keep in mind, and this is very important, that you don't always know the right thing until the turn is over. You can know what is objectively better in that moment, but not what would actually be the best decision if you knew everything. Finally, because Colress gives more information, and this is the biggest one to me, Colress gives more information, it will impact your ability to choose Comfey right significantly more than Comfey will impact your ability to choose Colress correctly. Colress has a much bigger impact a much larger impact on the board state and your hand. So when you play Colress first, it allows you to make the right Comfey decision. TLDR, Colress will be right more if you play it first. Comfey will be right more when used last. So that's the order. And I think when he's saying right, he means like the correct optimal decision.
Yeah. And that's mostly like for like I guess I didn't even read Finn's initial, but like Finn was asking like if you go first on your first turn going second. But it doesn't it still applies to any other turn after that where you're gonna do both. And the only thing that would the deeper you get into the game as far as turns go, the more likely it's possible that when you use Colress, you just don't have to use flower selecting, right? You just use your Colress, maybe you get to 10 and you're like, well, I only have like 10 cards left in my deck. Do I really want to risk this flower selecting kind of screwing me over for my future turns? And at that point, you can just be like, nah, I'm good. I'm just not going to flower selecting, right? Like
Yeah,
you could choose to do that.
I think that decision comes down a lot to if you think your opponent is playing disruption cards, because I think
Yeah,
one thing
of
is
course.
definitely apparent, and that is also a big caveat to this whole thing. A big old asterisk should be placed at the end of this discussion as it depends, right? Like,
Yeah.
because
Everything's situational.
everything is entirely situational, depending on what you think your opponent or your opponent plays and stuff like that. It can be tough to lost zone cards in the late game whenever your deck is very thin, but it can also be tough for this deck to draw out of a very timely Roxanne. So, um,
Exactly.
I think it can be worth it to take the risk to lost zone something potentially useful if it means you're more likely to lost zone something that is not useful that you don't want to draw off Roxanne. So, very nuanced, very situational, but there was a lot of discussion around it today, and not everyone is on this side. Actually, Natalie Miller did post saying, IDK if I'm just being a contrarian, but I can't really tell why most of the community thinks you should use Colress before Comfey. I always thought that since the most disasters can happen from Comfey, double net, etc., then I would want that info before I Colress, because I have the most control over Colress. So I want to make the decisions that I have the most control over with the most info, which I kind of understand this line of thinking as well, but I think ultimately um having more information as to what you're keeping, seeing more cards first is just generally going to be better, right?
Yeah, it almost feels like you can make that same argument for Colress. Like, as long as I understood that correctly, it almost feels like you could literally make that same argument for Colress. But one argument you can't make for Comfey is simply the 40-50% argument, where like you just lost zone less cards. You can't make that argument for Comfey. Whereas I think you can make that other argument exactly for Colress
That
as
is
well.
fair,
So
yeah.
I think Colress just kind of wins out in the end. And another thing, like the biggest thing for me is it just felt right. When I first played the deck, I was like, Colress just feels right. I've been playing Pokemon a long time, so usually just sometimes just going off your instincts in those kind of situations is just correct. So that was the biggest thing for me. It's like this just feels right to play Colress before Comfey. So that was my first like driving reason to want to go with the Colress before the Comfey.
Yeah, the math does not lie. That is, so when in doubt, you can just fall back
Yeah,
on the percentages for sure. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because it was something that was really, I mean, I think that post from Finn had like several dozen responses. It has like 50 likes. So a lot of people were talking about it today.
yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's really cool to see, and it's these are the cool questions in Pokemon, especially when there's a decent amount of people on both sides of the discussion. So yeah, it's really cool question from Finn, and cool to see the responses as well. And definitely
And
let us know in the comment section if you have a different take from what we've talked about or what you've seen that could potentially sway people one way or the other, or if you got some other reason behind Colress or Comfey.
And you had a lot of like top players weighing in on this too, so you
Yeah.
can get a lot of great opinions. My favorite response was definitely from Israel Sosa, who said, "Flower first to see what's up, then Colress." I think you should Colress first to see what's up, and then Comfy, right?
Yeah, that's like a very shortened version of Natalie's answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Flower first to see what's up. Depending what's up, Colress.
Well,
Yeah, that's a good one.
we'll move on from that though and chat a little bit about Peoria. So the Peoria Regionals, of course, was this weekend. We already mentioned Azul got top 32 playing the Reggies. He can go into a little bit about why he ultimately came to that deck choice in a moment here. But before we get into like the decks, the meta breakdown, and how everything shaped up, I think we should definitely just mention how the tournament ran, how things felt on the weekend. And I don't have like as great of a perspective on that because I'm not there as a player. So Azul, like from your point of view, as far as like between rounds and how long the tournament took, how did things feel?
I mean, it went pretty well. I guess the only like real unfortunate hiccup I think was just that there was just no promo cards. But besides that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here. But besides that, like it ran well. Like tournament ran well. Not too much to say. The only thing that was unfortunate is I broke my dice case, and I had one of the really old Japanese what were they? They're like champion something challenge. I don't even remember what they were, but a
I
lot of
don't know
people
where
will
they're
know probably what I'm
from.
talking about. There were Giratina, Rayquaza, and I think the other one was Ho-Oh. They're like small,
I pulled a
like
picture of it up.
square, yeah, little black dice cases. And unfortunately, I dropped it and it broke. None of the vendors had dice cases. Not a single one of them was had dice
Interesting.
cases. Yeah, so if there's a vendor out there, there's a market for it. Um,
For people like
me
Azul.
for me, at least one of you should take advantage. I'm just putting it out there. Yeah, no one had anything. I went to every single vendor. No one had a single thing. So that was the sad part for me. Besides that, it ran really well. I mean, Ballard
The Crecklers.
the Crecklers, yeah, always run a pretty good events, I would say for sure. So, um, no real hiccups besides the lack of promos, which I guess we could talk about next.
Yeah.
Unless you had anything to say as far as how what you saw from the casting side of things.
No, I mean, from our my point of view, everything went great. Everything was timely as far as it didn't ever feel like the stream was holding up the tournament from moving on, and it didn't ever feel like the tournament was dragging and the stream was just trying to kill time. And that's
Yeah.
I think the most common issue where things happen where the stream starts to the stream and the tournament. It's definitely hard to make those things intertwine and run on a concise schedule. And from my point of view, honestly, and to like I don't have to deal with that as much as like the producers of the show and the tournament organizers do, so I don't really see it that much. I just kind of sit in the chair and talk when they tell me to.
Yeah.
um
I
but
guess
from
one
my
more
point of view
thing.
it all went really well.
Yeah, one more thing we could bring up is that they did do the mid round interviews, which was I came on for two of those. I didn't play on stream ever, but I still made my way onto the camera, and got a another Pokemon shirt.
Two more, one
But those
more.
were two more. Yeah, I came on twice, so I got a couple more Pokemon shirts. And that was pretty cool. Those are pretty cool. I'm sure the stream loved it. So that was sick to have, and I hope they do it for the future events as well. Because I'm sure it was a great experience for the stream to have less downtime, especially like I mean they've added the double round four, and now they've added the is it double round four, double round three, whatever,
It's
double
double
round four,
round
double round
four.
three, yeah, double round four, and now they have these interviews in between rounds, just filling more content for the viewers to watch, less downtime. So I think that was sick, and it seemed to have ran smooth.
Yeah, I don't know what how much I can speak to about it because like I don't know all the details about what is planned, but I as far as I am aware, they are planning to have that at the rest of the regionals that are streamed. Um and also I believe there are some plans in place to improve it as well to make a little bit more stuff go on. So I would say just keep your eye out because I think that there is some exciting stuff planned, and I'm definitely excited to see how it goes. And yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, there's usually just four casters that are brought to each tournament. But for this tournament, there was four casters, and then plus one person was brought as a sidelines reporter, is what the role was called on our end. And that was Adam Dorcott, who casted Baltimore with me last time. And he just came on. He would pull people for interviews. It was kind of a way for us to fill time, but also for the viewer to check in with maybe some of their favorite players. Like you said, Azul, it never came up that we got Azul on the stream as a player, but you know, there's always people who are in the chat asking about how's Azul doing. Doesn't even know what his record is. So it's great to bring him on a couple times and just check in, real quick check in. You did make a pretty bold claim on the stream that there was going to be
Yeah.
six Reggie Gigas in top eight, and there was not a single one in top
Not a
eight. So
single one. Not a single one. At that point, it was looking pretty good. I was 4-1 or 5-1. Alex Shemansky was 6-0. Like it was looking good for it. The rest of my group was doing pretty well. I predicted like Grant to go 9-0 when he was like 4 or 5-0 as well. So like I don't know. I was feeling pretty good about Reggie, but a couple dead draws start to set in for all of us probably. And it yeah, no one was quite able to make it. Kid was the closest at ninth, but no Reggie's in top 8 this time around.
So to the issue about the playmats that you brought up a little bit, or not the playmats, the
The
promo
promos.
cards. So whenever, compared to Baltimore with the swag pickup, like what was that experience like?
I mean, this time I actually got in Friday because like last for Baltimore, I got in late Friday. Well, I guess I got in Friday both times, but I got in like at a reasonable time on Friday. So checked in on Friday instead of Saturday, and then immediately because I wasn't trying to not be able to get my mat and promo card, I immediately went over to the swag pickup, which I wasn't like a huge line or anything, and I was like, all right, get the mat. But they didn't have promo cards. They said they were arriving late, unfortunately, and that's like something that's like it's a little bit of a different story compared to Baltimore. Baltimore, they ran out of promo cards and stuff, whereas here they didn't show up in time, which it's definitely not to the fault of the organizers or anything. They just packages get delayed, right? And I think that's all it was really here. They're hoping it was going to arrive on Saturday. It didn't. No promo cards for anyone, unfortunately. But I think that's like a reasonable reason to not have the promo cards be there for people, right? Just human error, right? It happens. They weren't able to show up in time. That's fine, right? I was able to get my playmat. Unfortunately, it was an Enamorous playmat and not the Giratina playmat that I was hoping for. But I think Salt Lake does have Giratina mats, so I'll be able to get one at Salt Lake. Hopefully, once again, I'm going to be trying to show up pretty early, check in and get, or not check in on Friday. Also get my swag on Friday because I'm not trying to get you know, not trying to not be able to get my swag like I was at Baltimore anymore. So I'm going to be looking to get it on going on Friday every time now, where usually I would kind of be a little bit more lax and pick it up late Saturday or something.
Yeah, and this was definitely something that people were complaining about a little bit on Twitter, the lack of the playmats. I think that, like you mentioned, it's a
Promo.
logistical issue, right? I think that the difference between this and Baltimore, which I think Christopher Szymanski brought up in a tweet that was a pretty good point. People were talking about how regionals are $70 and we can't get the basic guarantee of the playmat and the promo, right? And
Yeah.
Christopher just replied, and for anyone who doesn't know who Christopher is, we've talked about him plenty of times on the podcast,
Yeah.
but pretty well respected head judge in the community. He was actually working in the Hive this weekend, so working on like the administrative side of things, I think, not head judging, but he said, I do think that these are entirely different scenarios. Baltimore did not have enough promos for all attendees and said, tough luck. Peoria's stance is Peoria's stance isn't a wall supplies last. Everyone got a playmat. It's a logistics failed and we're working on a solution for promos. So
Yeah.
that's good to see that they are working on a solution and hopefully something does come of it. I will say, I think it was Vancouver Regionals,
Yeah,
like
it's
this
Vancouver.
past year, they didn't have promos as well, and it's been 5 months, and like I think the promise was like we'll mail you your promos is what they've said, and I don't think anyone has said anything
Yep.
about that for Peoria, so I don't want to say that obviously, but I think that is what was said in Vancouver, and people have still not received their promo from Vancouver, so.
Yeah, I think there was was there a statement somewhere or something that they would try at least at the event. I'm pretty sure we'll try and figure something out to get people their promos after the event.
Yeah, I
The
looked
only
on the
way,
Peoria Twitter page and I didn't see anything. They also like retweet everything that the person who runs the day two events account retweets everything and it makes it impossible to find any like specific thing. So I was unable to find a statement, but I'm not sure if a public one has been made or if it was something they were just telling players at the event.
yeah, I think something like that was mentioned at the event. And if that happens, that's great. If it's not, I'm like that's fine in my opinion. Like I always look at life as like humans make errors. And I don't know where the error happened in this for them not to be able to show up on time. But it was just kind of a logistics thing, and they just maybe didn't make it, and that's like not that big of a deal in the end. I don't think at all. So it kind of sucks to not be able to have the promo, but it's stuff happens. At least we all had the event still, right? The event was ran. Everyone got an Enamorous mat, and, and yeah, we move forward, and hopefully it just keeps getting better and better with the future regionals.
And speaking of, we need to talk about the results of said regionals. And we talked about it a little bit at the top of the show, but Tord Reklev did end up winning the event. Of course, Tord, I think many consider to be the best player in the modern era of the game, if not maybe the best player of all time. It's obviously really hard to compare whenever we're talking about players from the past who don't even play anymore.
Yeah,
Two different eras pretty much. Players like Jason Klasinski, I think, is the big one, obviously. 3-time world champion. Hasn't really played very much in the modern era. Not at all, I don't think, since 2017. And Tord Reklev has just dominated since 2017. So, but
yeah,
anyway, Tord ends up winning this regionals, which we also need to mention was the largest regionals of all time.
I think it was actually a little bit short. I think Baltimore was still bigger. I looked on Limitless. It was 6 players. Baltimore
Oh,
was
I
up
see
by
that. I
6.
saw a post from Chris Szymanski that said, fun fact, if you count Peoria's numbers before round one, no shows were dropped, it was the biggest. And
Mm.
if you count Peoria numbers for round two after add-ons were added, um, it was tied with Baltimore, I think is what he said.
Oh, I'm just looking on Limitless. Yeah, Limitless
But I
says
see
it's
on
6
Limitless,
behind.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what number we go off of for that. I'm down to just trust Limitless's number until it changes.
Sure.
But it was pretty close. I mean, it's still over 1,000 people.
Yeah, it's still pretty massive for sure.
Yeah,
And I mean, I think that's great to see that there's this much interest in the game, especially in a
sure.
season where Worlds, which is the main goal, is seemingly unattainable to so many people, right? Not
We hear a
only is
lot.
it in Japan, but it is hard to qualify as well. But there's still this many people who are just wanting to play Pokemon competitively, which is so awesome to see, and it makes me excited for the future of the game. I'm really looking forward to what regionals are going to look like post rotation, because I think that just generally people are always looking forward to what's next. You know, people are always talking about after rotation, then this, and then after this rotates, then I can do this, right? So I think that after rotation in January, sometime some of those first few regionals might be massive.
Yeah, I mean, it's always after rotation, but then once rotation happens, it's like, okay, but with the next set, I'll be able to play
Yeah, yeah,
this, and
yeah.
then with the actually 2 sets from now, we can do this combo. One thing I did want to mention is, yeah, these regionals have been huge, right? Both regionals over 1,000 players, and Salt Lake City's at 924 for the TCG right now. So, and I'm thinking about just like, I mean, it's always the Masters, and the Masters TCG is by far the largest, player base of any of the games there, obviously. But we're gonna get the VG back in January, so the terms are gonna be that much bigger, right? And
and
especially the
and
first
VG is
one.
gonna have a new game as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So the first regional, but then that'll be. Ooh, will that be Orlando? I think it might be Orlando, or San Diego. I don't even remember. But it's gonna. I think that one's gonna be huge, right? New video game. The VG's back. Um, and then we don't know when we get rotation, so that could coincide with our rotation as well, right? We know our rotation is next year. We just don't know when it is. Do we know if it's January?
I think that's what they had said, but I don't know for
I think
sure.
so.
Maybe it'll correlate with when Scarlet and Violet base set comes out. You know, the new
Oh, okay, that would
set
make sense. Yeah.
for the video, or for the new video game coming out, which should be around January, February sometime, I think, right? With like our normal release schedule, it's usually the
Yeah.
beginning of the year or something like that. But the first regional back with VG is going to be San Diego, and usually the West Coast numbers are a little bit weaker than the East Coast and the Midwest. But
Yeah,
then
definitely.
a month later is Orlando, and or Florida traditionally just has a humongous Pokemon player base. Even for the East Coast,
Yeah.
it's like a little hard to get to Florida as far as like driving, because it's like a very long state. But Orlando
Yeah.
is usually a cheaper place to fly to, so
Yeah, exactly.
I think that Orlando will be massive numbers. San Diego will probably still be pretty large, to be honest. And I think a big part for the video game is going to depend on how good the community receives it as a competitive game. Sword and Shield was received very well as a competitive game. It was very easy to get a competitive team. People liked the new mechanic. Some of the restricted Pokemon were not allowed, so it made the meta way more unique than it's ever been for VGC. So people were excited, and Dallas Regional is the first regional with Sword and Shield. I don't know if you remember, Azul, but like they had VG in an entirely separate room because of how many players there were. There was like 500 VG players. It was their largest regional of all time.
Oh, I didn't even know that. I didn't even remember that. But yeah, that'll definitely be exciting for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about the
Yeah,
what else
sorry.
did well though at Peoria. Went off in a little bit, but I mean, yeah, it's super cool to see the game grow for sure, right? So the rest of the top 8, like I mentioned, at the beginning, Palkia and Teleon specifically, most dominant deck in top 8, 3 of them, in there, and then of course more Palkia in the Kirin Palkia deck, which is the most surprising to me to see 2 Kirin Palkias in top 8, but it was the most popular deck in the tournament. So once I figured that out, it wasn't as big of a surprise to me, to be honest.
Yeah, but it probably was a surprise that Kyrian Palkia was
Yeah,
the
there
most
was, yeah.
popular deck in the tournament, right? Of the 1,084 players on the Peoria meta analysis from Arcanine Labs, 173 players brought Origin Form Palkia V Star and Kyurem VMAX, which leading up to the tournament, I don't think anyone would have predicted this to be the most popular deck. I think most people would have predicted it to be one of the old favorites, Mew VMAX or Origin Form Palkia. Or if it was going to be a new deck, it was probably going to be Lost Box, I feel like, right?
Yeah.
It was going to be one of those three. And if we look at Lost Box, it was all the way down at number 5.
Yeah, Lost Box. I predicted it to be the most popular deck in the tournament, but I guess you have to kind of combo it with like it has to be not just Lost Box, and I feel like the Giratina builds, because it's not a deck I was trying to optimize too much leading into the event. They've shifted a little bit more to being a little bit more Lost Box focused, a little bit less Giratina with like a 2/2 Giratina, and then they got Sableye, Snorlax, Cram. They have all those other different attackers in there as well in counts of one or multiple.
Yeah.
I feel like the meta definitely shifted, or that deck has kind of shifted to be a little bit more towards the Lost Box build. And there's of course all the Lost Gate builds. That's what I call it, like to call them anyways, Lost Gate, which is where just like the Mirage Gate box builds, I like to
Hmm.
call them the Lost Gate builds. Um, I feel like you kind of have to put them together almost because they're getting to be very close or very similar to the same build. I feel like a little bit, but that really does separate the overall count of lost zone decks in a tournament. It dilutes them to being they're not the most popular deck, but if you put them all together, Lost Zone would probably be the most
Yes,
popular.
and it would have been. It would have been beaten out the Kieran by like 15 or 20 players. So if you combined the Comfey Giratina V Star, because that was actually the second most played deck, and is Giratina V Star being the second most played deck surprising to you? Because it's a little surprising to me. Because like you mentioned, I definitely would have expected just like the Lost Boxy version to be more popular, and it didn't really feel like people were hyping up Giratina very much at all heading into the event. Like I saw a couple posts on Twitter here and there about people who were really high on the deck, but its tournament results on Limitless were not the best compared to the other decks. I don't know. It wasn't also being played online in the numbers that the other decks were.
Yeah, no, those being the two most popular decks are definitely a little bit of a surprise to me for sure. Definitely at the tournament, I liked it though because Reggie has a good matchup into both of those decks, so ended up being like that much better for me than I expected overall in the tournament. But I didn't really expect that at all. But I mean, it kind of makes Guillotine is also it's like it can kind of beat everything. And I think it's like a big draw for a lot of players. It's like, whenever you can play like that one of tech card to beat a matchup, a lot of people like to do that, right? When you can play the Tina promo, people like playing their Tina promos. But Giratina just kind of naturally has a chance against literally everything, which I think is a pretty good draw for decks for the most part. That's why Palkia Inteleon was so popular because Palkia Inteleon can literally beat anything. Thankfully, Giratina is not another Palkia Inteleon because that deck is too strong, but it is another deck that has its own, different kind of strengths and weaknesses and things you can do, and it basically can beat anything. It doesn't really have any bad matchups.
Yeah,
It has to be a big draw for it.
my theory for why Kyurem was the most popular is that people already had their Palkias, right? So they know Palkia is real good and strong, but they want to play with something new. So it's like really easy to just pick up a 2/2 or a 3/3 Kyurem line and cram it together. Take your Intellions out, add some Gurus in, which you probably already have, and make a deck, right?
Yeah.
Play with a card you know really well, and get to play one of the new cards as well. Also,
Yeah. No, I think that makes
I
sense.
didn't quite realize until this weekend just how insanely good the Kiram V's first attack is. Like just being able to just flood the board with energies on turn one, potentially when you're going second, um, is so good to just threaten. Like that is an incredibly daunting thing to look at. Is whenever your opponent just attaches an energy to Kiram and then buckets a couple times and then puts 4 or 5 energies in play on turn one.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful and can set up for some really good like plays as well. Like you don't even need your Palkia, and you can already be threatening Radiant Greninja turn two,
Exactly.
right? Then you combo that with like maybe an Energy Excel from the Kyurem VMAX on the next turn itself, and yeah, you have basically all the options you would have as if you had access to like a full star portal. So it definitely is pretty scary for sure. It's nice
Uh,
to see that the V Pokemon are getting those good attacks. I mean, I think the V Pokemon with the best attack is Zoroark. Um, but it's nice to see that a lot of them are getting like useful turn one attacks when you go second.
And speaking of Zork, definitely I would say the big surprise, making it into the top 8. No Gudra were in the top 8. There was a Gudra on the win and in. Cyrus Davis did tie the win and in to get eliminated from top cut, but Zork did make it in there. And there was actually quite a few in day two. It
Yeah.
wasn't incredibly popular in the tournament. There was 56 players on it. There was more Reggie Gigas players in the event than Hisui and Zoark players in the event. But Zoark overall did pretty decently. Obviously made top 8. Another one made top 16. A deck that I really was a big fan of. Like, I thought this card was broken the first time I read it. I think I have scaled back a little bit from from that viewpoint. But what's interesting as well is that both of the lists that did well, the top 8 and the top 16 list, were pretty different. And then
Yeah.
another one made top 64 that was also pretty different. Aaron Tarbo with the Empoleon Melanie version.
Yeah, so three pretty different builds. There was the Mew build from Scotty, who got 10th. And that was the build I had seen a little bit leading up to the tournament. And I looked at it, I'm just like, and I still look at it, I'm just like, what are you getting off of Mew that is so good that you
Trekking
play four Mew
shoes.
and four scoop up net? It feels like the Jirachi loop on purpose. Like you're just sitting there, you go Jirachi for switch, Jirachi for net, repeat. This is just like literally just Mew for net, repeat. So I'm still not intrigued too much by the Mew build. They did get 10th though, which is pretty good. So I'm definitely gonna try it out. I still have my what is the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it. But yeah, the top 8 list, that one was checked out for the Lost Box matchup heavily. And this one was a little bit more standard, I think, as far as the builds go. Researches, Marnies, some shoes, but then double parasol, double Charon's care to really give yourself a chance, I would say, against Lost Box. Because without any kind of healing, Charizard just kind of runs through your Zoroarks at the end of the game. Because the Zoroark only has 270 HP, and then sometimes you have to use Gape Jaw Block to damage itself. And if they just set you up with a Sableye beforehand, the Charizard at the end of the game, back-to-back Charizard, is just going to be drawing them 4 prize cards almost every single time. So Parasols plus the Charon's Care definitely gives you a chance, I feel like, at the very least.
And there's also some cool things you can do just by the fact you play for damage pump in the deck, right? Like
Yeah.
Sableye wants to very meticulously place damage, and you can mess with that with your damage pump, which is pretty funny. Another card that was in Osvaldo's list, that who's the player who got top 8 with Zork, is the Dunsparce, which was not something many decks were playing at this point. And with how large Reggie Gigas was as a presence, right, that ended up probably being a pretty solid tech, I would imagine. Like
Yeah, I would definitely assume so.
Reggie probably doesn't love to see Dunsparce plus Sharon's Care from Zoark, I would imagine.
No, yeah, I had actually the first round of the tournament, I hit a Zoroark not playing Dunsparce, and it
Yeah,
was pretty easy.
right.
So yeah, the Dunsparce definitely makes things quite a bit harder. So pretty good call there, yeah, with the Dunsparce set. I'm sure that won them plenty of games against the Reggies.
But the deck that ended up ultimately winning was, of course, the Lost Zone box. While it was not the most played deck in the tournament, like I think many people
Yeah,
predicted, it did still end up taking it down, proving its power, which I don't think anyone was actually questioning. Um, the big, I think, notes from Tord's list here, who of course was the player who won with the deck, was that he was playing Path to the Peak over Pokestop, was playing no Canceling Cologne, because Path to the Peak, obviously, 3 Lost Vacuum, and also no Echoing Horn. Those were kind of my big takeaways from the list when I was looking at it during the tournament.
yeah, I definitely like the Path to the Peak. That's where my Lost Box list was at as well, leading into the tournament. Was Path was just I just don't like Pokestop. So and Path, it's like instead of playing 6 cards to attempt to accomplish something with like 3 cologne, 3 stop, and stops you don't even use every single turn, anyways. Like you don't ever want to use Pokestop. It's like, okay, I whiffed. I guess I'll use Pokestop, right? So when you can turn those 6 cards into just 4 Paths of the Peak or 3 Paths of the Peak, and then just add 2 or 3 other consistency cards, it kind of makes up for the fact that you don't get the potential aggressive draw power from Pokestop because it doesn't always do anything, and sometimes it just hurts you more than it helps you, and doesn't even remain neutral sometimes. So, definitely a huge fan of the paths. I think yeah, the biggest thing is like no, yeah, the biggest thing for sure like no echoing horn, right? And I guess another thing would be the no Roxanne. Which I
Sure.
think is a super powerful tool in the mirror match. But when there's no mirror match to be played against, it doesn't really matter. And there was not that many of this build of a Lost Zone deck. No, not that many of the Lost Boxes actually played. It was more the lost of the Tinas and the Lost Gates, I feel like overall. I mean, that was like made up overall a bigger majority. So there you didn't really need that kind of edge in the mirror match through the Roxanne.
And speaking of the Giratina version of the deck, John Eng did make top 8 with it. Played the same list as Justin Bakari, who also finished in the top 64. And I think their list is pretty solid. I was a big fan of Michael Pramawat's list with the the twin energies and the Snorlax. I thought that was a really cool addition to the deck. I mean, Snorlax is just such a beater of an attacker in these like one prize matchups. You know, you can power it up so quickly. You don't even have to Lost Zone to it with the twin energies or Mirage Gate to it as well. Like if you just go first and get down a Snorlax and put a double twin energy on it, it's doing 180 next turn, like every time.
Yep. Yeah, it does just start swinging and really cool. Actually, that list played two Snorlax,
Yes,
which I actually thought I just kind of assumed John had been doing the same thing because that gives you like a big game plan against the Lost Box matchup. I guess you can kind of
because
replicate a
of
similar game
Snorlax's,
plan.
yeah, let's just
Yeah,
clarify, because of like the ability of Snorlax, like
yeah,
prevents all effects of attacks. It's got 150 HP, so it's really not efficient for Lost Box to deal with Snorlax as an
yeah.
attacker.
Yeah, so 150 HP. Sableye can't hit it. Cram only does 110, and you're ideally trying to attack with Snorlax before Charizard can even become a threat, right? I guess you can kind of replicate that board state with like Snorlax plus Luminion, though. You could have like Snorlax on your bench while you're attacking with Luminion, which is a super cool attacker in a lot of scenarios. I actually had a couple people attack with Luminion against me. Like I'd attack with my Lecky, and they would go, okay, set up my Luminion to get my Colress, then load up energy on Luminion, and then attack with Luminion and shuffle it back into my deck. But when you go up against other Lost Box decks that can't really one hit KO Luminion, you could sit there and attack with it, let them hit you with their Sableye, hit you with your Cram, and then attack with it again next turn and shuffle it back to the deck. So even though John didn't have the double Snorlax, the Luminion can kind of replicate a similar board state, but but double Snorlax I think is like a good addition to try and handle Lost Box in general. Because yeah, the unfazed fat ability from the Snorlax is so good against the deck.
Absolutely. So those are some really cool ones. There's definitely some really good decks as well that were on the outside looking in. We talked about Reggie's a little bit. I guess here, if you want to talk a little bit about why you came to the conclusion to play Regigigas, and I would imagine that's what led to so many other players also landing on the deck, because there was what, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight Gigas in top 32, which is wild.
Yeah, so it wasn't really a deck on my radar, me and my squad's radar, until about probably like 3 days before the tournament. We were just kind of discussing what are good potential plays, and we are like, okay, well, Gigas actually seems pretty good into a decent amount of the matchups right now. And they were like, okay, well, let's add it to our spreadsheet. We'll add Gigas to our spreadsheet, and then it won the spreadsheet pretty handedly because it does really have a really dominant matchup spread against a lot of the decks in the format, especially when we weren't expecting decks to be playing Dunsparce or playing SQ or anything like that. We like kind of knew no one was going to be bringing those tech cards. We are like, well, its matchup spread then is like super dominant into the field. So we're like, okay, well, let's just play it then. Like it won our spreadsheet, and we're like, all right, then we'll just run it. And that's usually how we come to the determination of most of the decks we play. Is just if it wins the spreadsheet, especially that handedly, there's no reason to kind of second guess it. Just kind of run it, trust the process or whatever, and then go with it. So yeah, that's kind of how we came to the determination to play Gigas. A lot of people don't run spreadsheets, but I'm sure they could just look at the matchups and be like, it beats this, it beats this, it beats that. Okay, I'll run Gigas too.
And then another deck that did pretty well on the weekend was, of course, Mew VMAX. Really, Riley should have been in top 8. He lost 2 win-ins in a row after getting down paired and not being able to ID, which he was, I think, a little salty about, which is very understandable. Like, the matchups just got weird, and you hit down. He starts 11-2. It's like you just hope you can ID a couple times, but no, he has to play.
Yeah.
He has to play twice and loses both of them. It's just kind of how it goes sometimes. It's definitely a bit of a bad beat, though.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate for Riley. Yeah, Mew, really popular. Was it the third most popular deck of the tournament, right? Or was it
Yes,
fourth?
yes, yes. It was the
Third,
most
yeah.
popular of the not new
Non-new
decks.
decks. Yeah,
Yes.
which is really no surprise. Mew's been such a staple for so long. As far as like talking about people playing decks because they have the cards, a lot of people have Mew at this point. And it's super cool to see the DTE build be the way to play the deck though, because it's so much more enjoyable to play against when you're playing anything, because you're not going to get turn one Meloetta and just lose the game turn
Yeah.
one because you chose to go first. So the deck is still very powerful, still does Mew things to an extent, but not to the extent that it has in the past. And this is definitely the better way to play it. So it makes it way more enjoyable to go up against Mew now for sure. But I honestly don't. I'm not a huge fan of Mew because I don't think it actually has a very good matchup spread against the Lost Zone decks. Yeah, I mean, you're fine into your Curums and your Palkias, but I feel like up against Lost Box or Tina, especially if they bring the Drapion, which I'm sure everyone is going to have Drapion from here on out, If you didn't play Drapion at what's it called, you definitely made a mistake. Definitely should have included the Drapion in your Tina deck, and you should do that going into Salt Lake City. I don't see a reason to play Mew like going forwards. Like I think it was like an okay play for Peoria. We almost saw one in top 8 from Riley, but yeah, to be honest, it's kind of cool to see Mew no longer be such a great play.
I mean, this list from Riley, I mean, it's kind of like on Limitless, you can scroll down and see the people who played the same list. And I think this is pretty much their whole testing group. Maybe add in Jesse Parker in here, but Riley Holbert, Adler Pierce, JW, and Andrew Mahone all finished 36th or better. So pretty good showing from like, I mean, if it's like one testing group of 5 people and 4 of them finish 36 or better, that's usually pretty good results. Like that's kind of the
Yeah,
results that you guys would see a lot of the time, right? And it would be similar to what this tournament was for you as well.
yeah. No, definitely can't complain about the results for sure. Like that's a solid result. Mew was like a solid play overall, but yeah, like going forwards at the very least, I'm not a huge fan of Mew, but it's super cool. And if it does still continue to exist, I hope it's the DTE build because it's just such
Yeah.
a cooler deck. So many cool plays you can do with the deck as well, like Roxanne cross switcher combos. Now people are including like the Roxanne Path combo in here as well. So, um, and then even like the switch card, the hyper potion, I wasn't even thinking about to be honest with the deck at all. Um, but using that to give yourself a better chance against a Lost Box matchup,
Yeah.
you know, if the hyper potion heal your Genesex, it was really funny seeing people develop their lists to deal with Lost Box going into Peoria, and people were adding Cheryl. And Lost Box never attacks your Muse in the matchup
Yeah,
if it's
no.
played correctly. So I think a lot of people were hitting some Lost Box players that were cramming and sableing the Muse. They're like, oh, what if I play Cheryl? But yeah, it was kind of funny to see that develop in the online tournaments a little bit. But yeah, the Hyper Potion's cool. And then actually like a tech that I was considering, or my group was considering in Mew, was Volo. We had Volo in our list for Mew, but we decided the Lost Box matchup was still too tough to want to bring Mew overall. But Volo just discards a V Pokemon off your bench, so you could just like
Yeah.
fully heal a Genesect, which is
Yeah,
cool as well.
Ian Robb got top 32 with Mew, and he was playing Volo in his
Oh,
list.
he had the Volo. Okay,
Hmm.
okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
so
Volo
that's
is pretty
another
cool.
option for sure. I think the hyper potions may be a little better after seeing that come out. That's probably the route people
Yeah,
want to go.
it lets you Marnie or Roxanne on the same turn, which is a pretty
Sure,
big deal as well.
sure. Definitely. So I mean, that's kind of the main results there from. I guess we should talk about Gudra a little bit. We haven't really talked about Gudra because it
Oh yeah,
definitely had pretty decent numbers and did really well. 2 in the top 16, like I mentioned earlier. Cyrus was a win away from making top 8. Did tie the winning in though. Um, but yeah, Hisuian Gudra and kind of the popular tech from the weekend as well in it was the Zamazenta V. No, not the Zamazenta V that people were playing in like their Lost Box decks. The one from Sword and Shield base set. I actually had to do a little bit of a double take the first time I saw someone playing it. I was like, wait, this is the one they're meaning to play? And sure enough, yeah, Dauntless Shield actually pretty solid again. This Zamazenta is pretty good against Mew VMAX as well. It's mostly here,
yeah.
obviously, for Kyurem, as it hits it for weakness, and but Kyurem has Palkia to deal with it. Mew VMAX will have a little bit harder of a time, which is kind of interesting how that has shifted.
Yeah, because you only got the max miracle to like 2-hit KO it, so you can like start to remove quite a few DTEs from play
Yeah,
as you go through it. And we talked about Gudra a little bit last week. We both said like we thought it would be once the meta settles, we think it'll get better, right?
yeah,
Once the meta settles and it works for it, or the meta evolves to a point where it works for it. But like this meta was pretty open. But I don't know if that's going to change very much, to be honest. Like a lot of these decks are just super powerful, and it makes it hard to really pick a deck for a tournament. Like none of the decks that were like played and did well overall, made day 2 in the top 64. None of them were terrible, really, right? But even then, even though the meta wasn't super settled, Gudra's still 2 in the top 16, like you said, 1 on the win in. And it is the Arceus build for anyone who's curious. Everyone who did well, as far as I can tell, was on the Arceus build. I don't know if
yes.
any of the Lost Zone builds made day 2. I don't think so. Maybe one, but yeah, the ones that did well were playing the Arceus. It's a build I haven't played any games with, so I definitely want to give it a shot and try it out myself. But it's cool to see the Gudra doing well. Like even though the metal's not super settled, still seems to be able to hang with most of the top decks.
So that is the results from Peoria. We'll be talking about our thoughts on kind of where the meta is going a little bit later in the episode. But for now, we're going to take a little break and get to everyone's favorite part of the show, the good old Guess That Flavor Text segment, where each week one of us will pick a card, read off the fun little bit of text in the bottom corner, the flavor text as it is known, and have the other host try to guess which card is featured. If you get it correct, you can get 4 points. And there are, of course, lifelines as well. For each lifeline you use, you lose a point. So there's 3 lifelines, which are what set the card is from, what stage the card is, and then read an attack name. Have the host read an attack name. It is my turn to pick a card and read for Azul. And we, of course, always want everyone to be playing along at home. Try to guess that flavor text with Azul. Let's see if you can get it. Azul, are you ready, man?
I'm ready. Let's get it, Chip. I'm ready to take. Are we tied still? We're tied still, right?
We've been tied for forever, man. We're both
Okay,
terrible at
I'm
this.
ready. I'm ready to take the lead. Let's get it.
Okay. If a child has made friends, sorry, let me start over. If a child it has made friends with is bullied, blank will find the bully's house and burn it to the ground.
I actually know I've read this flavor text before. I don't remember what Pokemon it is. Someone requested it. I have this little one of the channel points redemptions on my stream is read a flavor text, and someone has redeemed this Pokemon before, but I have no clue. I cannot think of what it is. Chip was scared there for a second.
I thought when I picked this, because this is one that someone has suggested to me before as well that I read. Uh, so I thought that there was a chance that had happened when I picked this, but I just kind of rolled the dice and I figured we'd see. But
Okay, so it picks a child, and when the child is getting bullied, it goes and burns the house down of the bully. That's pretty extreme.
can you believe this is on a Pokemon card?
Yeah, more people probably live in that house than just the bully. Like, so let's think. So I assume has to be a fire type Pokemon. But for some reason I'm thinking it's like because there is like fire ghost type Pokemon. This kind of feels like some kind of ghost type Pokemon. But they are burning down that because they're burning down the house. Yeah, I don't know, but I can't think of any like lampant, but it's not gonna be a lit wick. Chandelure. That's where I'm going with this. Man, this is tough. I'm definitely going to have to use some lifelines because I'm kind of stuck here.
Yep.
So let's go with what stage the card is.
It is a basic.
Okay, basic Pokemon. It's not going to be enough though. What set is the card from?
It is from Cosmic Eclipse.
Cosmic Eclipse. Oh my god. I feel like I should know this. Like I've definitely someone has requested this on my stream before. I'm gonna go all out with all the lifelines here. Maybe something will spark. What give me an attack name.
All right, this is gonna help you a little bit. Dragon Claw.
Dragon Claw. So it's definitely a dragon Pokemon. I'm still stuck. I'm still stuck. So it's a dragon Pokemon. It's a basic. It's from Cosmic Eclipse. It's Cosmic Eclipse where ADP came from. That's right?
Correct, yes.
So ADP came from Cosmic Eclipse. What else did we get in Cosmic Eclipse? I can't think of anything. I'm like stuck.
Need a guess.
Dragon Fire. I can't even think of a dragon Pokemon right now. Now I'm just like trying to think of a dragon Pokemon.
Being put on the spot is tough.
Let's just go with the. Now I want to say Gudra for some reason. I don't know why I want to say Gudra because we were just talking about Gudra, I guess. But there's no way it's Gudra. I'm trying to think of it. Hang on, give me 1 second. Let me think of a dragon Pokemon. But it's a basic. Oh my gosh.
I was gonna say. I was gonna die if you locked in Gudra.
I'll guess Goomy.
Goomy! Evil Goomy coming down from the mountain, tearing the house down. Can you picture it? No, Azul, sadly, it is not Goomy. It is Drampa the Grandpa. Drampa.
Wait, it's Drampa?
Drampa.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Azul, how many tournaments have you played a Drampa card in?
A lot. Well, not that many. I played. Actually,
you played a decent.
No, I played a lot of Drampa Garb. I played a lot of expanded Drampa Garb. Yeah, that's true. Oh my gosh. All right.
To be
Whatever. We'll get
fair,
him next
Drampa
time.
GX is colorless, so I guess I'll give you the
Yeah.
break there. But
Yeah, I've
yes,
definitely now that you mentioned, I can picture the card in my head. I've definitely, yeah, that I've read that card on stream before, but I did not remember it or read the flavor text for it.
well, we
Unlucky.
remain tied at 3-3. To probably nobody's surprise.
All
Someone
right, you
this
might get it
weekend
next
came
week.
up to me this weekend. I think it was either this weekend or at Baltimore. Someone came up to me and was like, Chip, I've been playing Guess the Flavor Text alongside you guys. I have 34
Oh
points.
my gosh. Yeah, for anyone who's keeping track, who let us know in the comment section on YouTube. What are your points at right now? Now I'm
Yeah.
kind of curious if they had 34. I mean, I wonder. I can only be so high. I don't know how many episodes we've done now, especially with the 4 points. But
Yeah.
I'm curious who's got the high score.
Where's the high score? Let us know. Let us know down below if you got this correct or not. But we will move on. And before we talk about the meta moving forward and kind of where we think things are headed, there's a little bit of a mix up, a little bit of viral news to come out of the tournament this past weekend. Now, we do try to keep things family friendly here on the Uncommon Energy podcast. So, we're not going to talk in detail about what was said, but maybe a slightly unsavory and slightly hilarious comment was made on stream by one of the casters. A little bit of an inappropriate joke. I think a little bit of a slip of the tongue type moment. Nothing, it really is nothing too bad.
Yeah,
Um, but what made it funny is that after the comment was said, I'm not going to play the comment, but I'll show the video here. Because the caster says the statement, and then the stream cuts away like right afterwards,
yeah,
which made it, I think, even more, a little bit more notable than it would have been. And this ended up getting pretty big traction. The Twitch clip right now has 94,000 views. It was one of the top posts on Livestream Fails subreddit a few days ago. It has 1,500 upvotes right now. This is like one of the biggest online culture subreddits that there is. Deserto. I've always called this place Dexerto, but Azul said it's Deserto. He said I was wrong.
Deserto.
Deserto, whatever. I've always said Dexerto, but I guess I am
Over, yeah, the X is like silent.
Deserto. That's like just dessert. I don't know. Anyway, said they made a post about it. There's an article on their site, and our friend Kyle Sablehouse was the caster who said the said statement. The clips are out there. You can go watch it for yourself. And Kyle did release a statement about this. Said, for clarification, I'm mortified by this clip. This one was completely unintentional. I thought earlier I said something like, that's what you like to see, and I didn't want to repeat myself, and then apparently found the worst collection of words to replace that. Instead of saying that's what you like to see, he said, that's how we like it. About something. And then absolutely understand why the clip is making the rounds. Ultimately, I just want to cast the game I love and for everyone to enjoy and maybe even learn something about our great game and community.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It feel like Kyle's like super scared, and that people are like overly judging him for the comments made. Definitely, an unfortunate slip of the tongue. And I mean, overall, I mean, I don't. It's not really that bad. It's definitely funny to see it come out, and it definitely was made way worse that they like cut the stream a second after he said it, instead of cutting out what he said. So it definitely made it so much worse. It was like they panicked and were like, shut it down, shut it all down right now. So that was hilarious the way it kind of all played out. And I think overall it's just a plus because I think there's so much traction from something so innocent. Like it's just kind of a plus for the Pokemon TCG, Pokemon tournaments in general to get this much traction in, esports streaming news places like that, right? So I think it's just like a plus overall for Pokemon as a whole. So if anything, Kyle should get a raise for for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that like the people who shouldn't hear something like this won't even understand the context, and the people who get it think it's hilarious, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a big deal. I've told Kyle that I don't think it's a big deal, and Yeah, it definitely just kind of a funny moment that we wanted to touch on and cover because I mean, it's not often that something in the Pokemon TCG goes that mainstream viral. Though it did happen
Yeah,
not that unrecently, right? With the whole jumbo cards thing at NAIC, that was
that's
maybe a little
true.
bit bigger than this, but this is still pretty big. But
Yeah.
from there, favorite decks moving forward, how the meta is shifting, kind of what our thoughts are. So coming out of Peoria. We're just 2 weeks away from Salt Lake City, and then 1 week after Salt Lake City is Lille Regionals in France. So we got a couple of big regionals coming up. Um, Meta's always changing. I haven't even looked at online events the last couple nights. I'm not even sure if anyone has done anything crazy. I'd imagine people are still in the phase of kind of copying the lists that were doing well. Oh, just kidding. Meta's changing. Just clicked on the late night tournament that is happening tonight, and in the top 8 there are two Blissey.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Actually, Blissey seemed like a pretty a pretty interesting play actually going into Peoria. I definitely thought about it. Didn't end up pulling the trigger on that one, but yeah, it just handles the Lost Zone decks. I mean, besides Tina, it handles like all the Lost Box, the Lost Gate decks really, really well. And then you always have just kind of Miltank to just like squeak out some weird dubs with. So Miltank is definitely interesting, or Blissey in general is pretty interesting as a deck right now. And then I think we'll just see a lot. I think it's possible the meta just kind of shifts around and we just see a lot more Palkia, to be honest. I could see that happening. I would definitely like to see like more stuff like Gudra and stuff get popular because I think it will. It's definitely like the cool deck I think to come out of Peoria Regionals is definitely the Gudra. I think that's the deck everyone's looking at be like, oh, I want to try Gudra. Gudra can work with Arceus. The deck is good. I want to try that out, give that a shot. So I think that's the big one that will probably see the biggest spike in popularity. But as the meta potentially stabilizes from here, it does open up for opportunities like stuff like Blissey to be good and maybe some other stuff to make a comeback as well.
yeah, these are some of my favorite spots is where the meta it like sort of stabilizes, like you said, and people find really cool counters. And I think it's
Yeah.
really interesting. There's definitely something cool out there that someone hasn't figured out yet. I feel like with the Mirage Gate Lost Zone engine that doesn't involve like Sableye Lost Box or Giratina, right? Like, because it doesn't have to like just because the card is green and purple does not mean you have to accelerate Psychic and Grass Energy with Mirage Gate, right? There's so many different basic Pokemon V that have come out over the last 3 years. Like, surely there is some cool, like, anti meta counter deck that someone could come up with to hit for a bunch of weaknesses. Because you can pull, like, specific types of energy out of your deck, you know? Like, I feel like there's just got to be something cool sitting in the woodworks waiting for someone to kind of discover and, answer the meta. Now, things I think are maybe still a little too open for something like that, but we'll see kind of how it develops. I mean, 2 weeks to Salt Lake City. Do you expect things to really change online, and then that lead to big changes heading into that regional tournament?
I think we could. I think we'll maybe see a development of decks, especially this week, of stuff like Blissey becoming popular enough that enough people try and decide, oh, this is a good deck, or stuff like that. And that's the only one that's kind of really popped up so far. I think we will see a general overall shift. I don't think Kyurem will be the most popular deck at Salt Lake City. It'll probably be Palkia and Teleon, but we'll have to wait and see for sure. But yeah, I don't expect Kyurem being the most popular deck back-to-back tournaments. So Blissey's the first thing to kind of pop up and be like, okay, this is what the meta is, and Blissey matches up pretty well against it. You know, what else can kind of pop up and kind of be those kind of decks? We'll see over like the next week. And then sometimes there's not enough time for players to actually play with the decks to actually make them popular at the next major tournament. So if, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, another deck kind of starts to pop up in these online tournaments, it might not get picked up by the time Salt Lake actually happens.
So we'll see how things change. Also, something worth noting as well, a lot of times players, like the more kind of casual, less try hard players, like there's plenty of people who already have their pick for Salt Lake pretty much
Yeah,
locked in. You know, like there are
that's
people who
true.
know I'm playing Mew at this tournament, or I'm playing the new Giratina V Star deck. Like I bought the Giratinas, I'm playing the Giratina deck, right? Um, so there's definitely plenty of people that fall in that. I mean, probably like 20% of players who are playing in Salt Lake already know what they want to play, something like that.
Yeah, I could actually see it being higher than that. There's actually a very large percentage of the player base who like just like is going to play their deck. And a lot of people, the biggest thing, and it's something that like I don't always think about when I'm picking a deck or thinking about what other people will play, or just thinking about other people's accessibilities. Like I go out of my way to make sure I have access to every deck, right? But not everyone does that, right? A lot of people have their couple decks, or they just keep modifying their deck they like the most, like the Mew or the Palkia or whatever, even as the formats adjust, as long as it's not truly awful, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people do. I think there's a very large percentage of the community that either has already picked their deck and locked it in, or knew what they want to play when the set came out, so they only bought those cards, or they just adapt their deck from the previous set because nothing else looks cool or fun enough for them to want to switch. I would even say it'd be like higher. It could be up to like 40-50%. Players already like know what they're going to play for Salt Lake City.
Sure.
And then there's the people who kind of wait last minute or a couple days before to try and make as good of a meta call as possible. And then there's the people who kind of panic and just pick up something new because all of a sudden they heard about people teching for the deck that they're playing or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely panic switches, which I would say is generally not a good idea. But
Yeah, if you have a good fundamental reason to switch to a
sure.
different deck, like, and you're like, okay, this is why I shouldn't play this deck. I should play this other deck instead. That's one thing, but just to be like, oh my gosh, they're playing Pseudo Wudo in their decks. I can't play Rayquaza anymore. Then, like, that's not quite as good. But yeah, don't panic. But if you can come up with good, solid reasons, then make the switch.
One other thing I do want to mention is kind of just the lack of Arceus V-Star in the meta right now. We see Arceus V-Star Gudra, but after we're coming off of a season where Arceus won every single North American regional championships, it was the most dominant deck through North America. Obviously, you won NAIC with an Arceus deck. Andre Skubal won Worlds with an Arceus Flying Pikachu deck. It wasn't like not in the tournament, but its numbers were not great. Let me see. I'll pull up on the list, the meta share for us in just a second. There was a couple Arceus Duraludon in day 2. One got top 32, and then in the top 64 there were 2 Arceus Flying Pikachu. So is it just like a sign that it's not great right now, or is the way to play Arceus just Arceus Gudra, or is there something else out there for Arceus that people just haven't kind of gone to yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Tina and Kirim are like the main reasons that Arceus isn't great. Like when like both like Arceus generally doesn't want to get one hit KO'd, and when you can avoid that, you put yourself in a decent spot. And that's why like Gudra works with Arceus because like Arceus can sometimes not get one hit KO'd, and then Gudra's definitely not getting one hit KO'd most of the time. Kirim can still get there, but when they have to expend so much energy to KO one Gudra, your follow-up Gudra or Arceus is definitely going to be fine, right? Um, so yeah, I think it is just kind of like there's more decks in the format that take big one-hit KOs. But it's nice to see that the format is not so focused around just 2 prize, 3 prize Pokemon, that those decks aren't the only viable decks. I think then Zoroark would come out on top to be like the best deck, right? Because it is kind of the best heavy hitter. So, the lost boxes and the lost gate decks kind of keep the meta in check and keep it in more where your deck has to function to be able to do the one hit KO stuff sometimes, but also be able to keep up with these 1 prize decks, which is pretty cool. But I think Arceus gets kind of lost in the mix where it's like, for the most part, like the decks that are more focused on Arceus because like they can't really keep up at all with the one hit KO decks, except for Gudra because Gudra is so tanky.
Right. Well, I think that is it for this week's episode. A little bit shorter of an episode than we've had in a while, so we appreciate everyone for listening. We did release this week's episode on Wednesday just because of flights and travel stuff. Azul didn't get in until really late Monday night,
Yeah.
I think, right? So
Mhm.
Tuesday morning was just not going to happen. But we appreciate the support as always. We will be back next week with our Salt Lake City meta prediction and meta forecast, all those things. Tuesday, 7 a.m. Eastern. If you want to interact with us, the best way to do it is over on Twitter generally. Myself at Trainer Chip. Azul is at Azul_GG. And you can also follow the podcast at Uncommon_Energy. And please feel free to leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcasting platforms. It is the quickest and easiest way to show your support. It only takes a second and it helps more people find the podcast. So, yeah, thanks all for the support as always.
Yep. Appreciate it. Catch y'all next week. Peace.